on the Friday packet. Because, I mean, if they get it in the Friday packet, I mean, it goes to everyone. I'm talking about, on the Friday packet, it's just right there. So, I mean, do they read it on the Friday packet, or do they go and click at the drop-down menu?
But no matter what, the minutes have to be online.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying, I'm just curious as to, like, we're putting them out there, these highlights, basically the highlights, and do they go back and check them? I mean, like, obviously you wouldn't be able to tell if it's the same people, but just to get an idea of how many people are actually viewing your minutes online as opposed to the ones that come in the Friday packet.
And would that have any bearing on whether or not you'd feel that the highlights should or should not continue in printed format, though?
No, I don't know if it would have any bearing. I mean, I just,
Just kind of an interesting...
I just think it, any time you can get some data on something like that and look it over.
Erica, you wanted to speak to
the highlights, the reason we started the highlights, I think about 10 or 12 years ago, was because the public voiced that they didn't want to wait for the minutes. So they wanted to know right after the board meeting what had happened. So that's how the highlights started with, I create the highlights, they go to Lisa, we review them and, work out any of the bugs and stuff. So then they are pretty much the same as the minutes, because we don't, there wouldn't be anything different that we would include or not include except for the votes and stuff like that.
Or the corrections.
But
right?
And the corrections go in the minutes. But that was the public request, that they didn't want to wait.
But maybe the fact that they are as detailed as they are is half of our problem.
Yeah, maybe it's not really a highlight that you're doing. You're just doing
You're
minutes,
starting-
but they're just not official minutes.
I think the difference that I'm seeing between the highlights and the minutes is that in the minutes, we're actually putting people's names.
Right.
In the highlights, we're saying, like during open forum, a parent spoke about whatever. And then, as far as board discussion is concerned, it's not, we don't actually say the board person's name until we get to the minutes, and then then the names are all kind of put in. And that's the way it's always been. I don't know why it's been that way, but I think, I think our highlights are just too chunky.
Yes, I would be of the opinion that
Turn it down.
before we eliminate, is there a way that we can modify the content of the highlights to convey the gist of what
Can I see this?
took place at
Did you see
the at the board meeting, but not have so much in there that they would necessarily become then the formal minutes? And even with that, also look to minimize on minutes. So can I suggest that perhaps next month, so this would be December, that, how can we do this? Well, what if we started with today? Obviously, we're going to have minutes from today. Would you be opposed to maybe creating some mock-up for Wednesday as to what the highlights of today could possibly look like?
Well, I wouldn't do highlights on a special meeting.
No, but I'm asking.
A sample, she's saying. Could we get a sample?
Pretend. Sure, just pretend.
Okay, pretend when they were
No,
not
I'm
putting
kidding.
out
Of course
we
next week.
Yeah, just to pretend.
It's just a suggestion.
It's a little homework
you know,
assignment, Erica. Roll with this.
Erica, would you like to meet on this?
Just to get an idea on what perhaps it might look like. In which case, we meet next month, or we meet next week. We wouldn't necessarily eliminate the highlights. We could look at perhaps a prototype of what you think a toned-down highlights could look like, and maybe we could go with some decisions for what could come following the November meeting. It's just a thought. What's the rest of the board's idea on this? Do you
I think
want to
that's
see?
fine.
Yep,
It's-
that's good.
Okay.
Would you want to do that in December, and then you can have the November actual regular meeting? Rather than using a special meeting to create that?
Right, because you'd have
Yeah.
more agenda items and everything.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So it would make more sense
for
with
that.
That would
more
also give a
items.
little more time to,
To think about it. And, yeah.
Want it for next week?
No, I think that's a good idea, because
All
then
right,
it's going to be
wait till
more
December?
true to
I could work something up.
What would happen.
what we're doing.
In real life.
All
Right,
let's wait till
right.
December.
That makes me feel better.
You get a break.
And then we're in agreement too then that, now again, the question would be, would we want to make any changes to our minutes right now? Or keep our minutes as is,
It was more the highlights. Was the
More the
issue, so, yeah.
highlights.
I think so. Yeah.
but we could still maybe start working toward toning down our minutes as well? Okay, all right. Items on the pro forma? Is there anyone who wants to speak as to what the content of that?
Where, do we have a copy of that? I mean, it's in our,
I did,
do,
I could get some. I didn't-
If I'm not mistaken, I don't know who brought it up, but it was something
I don't know
like.
either.
It was something, right, but, I'm sorry?
I just
recall
said I
either.
can't
Okay,
remember the.
I think it was
remember.
something like, we'll have on there, making it up, June meeting, approve the milk bid. But I think it was brought up in context of, okay, as opposed to waiting until June, if we wanted to explore the idea of shopping, how much sooner do we need to know in order to, so we may need 3 months to talk about it as a board. 1 month to decide, yes, we're gonna go out for bid, and another month to collect the data. So we may need it 3 months in advance of when it's actually on. So what we have is the action item is on the pro forma agenda, but not the forewarning that, hey, this is coming up. We need to have an agenda item to say, are there any changes? Do we need any changes? No? Okay, great, it's set for June. I think that's why that was brought up.
So
I
like
cannot
a
recall.
little blurb that would say, looking ahead, in June, we will be discussing da-da-da-da.
Right, but beyond just items for next agenda, that occurs
Right.
anyway, because the looking ahead actually occurs at the end of each meeting with the items for
That's
next
just for the
agenda.
next month,
This is, right, exactly. This is just for the next month. We'd be looking at 3 months down the line,
Is the pro forma agenda on the website?
No, this is for board reference.
Would it be behoove us to put it out there so people could see if they wanted to know what's going to be? Well, they can look at their agenda, I guess, items ahead of time.
Well,
Or, you
there's,
know.
I don't see a downside to, we've never had any interest expressed by anybody to see it, but it's typically, board reference thing.
It's like housekeeping, isn't it basically our
Yeah,
housekeeping?
and just, to Mark's point, what's happened over the, when I started, there was no pro forma calendar, right? So I suggested to the board that we needed to build this. So it was kind of a skeleton at the time, and then Landry, you helped a lot with the policy part of it, so we built all that in. And then when issues came up, it's usually with bidding or fees. And so what we did is we amended the pro forma so that there's a preliminary discussion in December. So as time goes on, we've amended the pro forma to, allow for things that needed to be in there on a kind of a more of a routine basis, but also if there need to be some lead time. So that may be the way for the board to kind of take a look at that and say, well,
how much time do we need?
how much time do we need? I mean,
Right.
that, I don't know of an immediate issue, but it doesn't mean that something wouldn't come up.
And that's just my recollection of why this is on here. Maybe someone else who actually requested it would know more. Because that's the only thing I can think of as to why,
Yeah, I don't really recall.
right, I mean, that would
No,
be that.
yeah, and it has been tweaked as people make suggestions, because I think people just find it very helpful, and particularly policy. And I think that was one of the reasons why we added a lot more detail, because policy was just getting kicked down the road, and we weren't like saying, well, we've got to do it, review it this day, so, make a decision at, the subsequent meeting. So that's all been very good, and I think maybe the thing to do, if there's no immediate concern with it, is just the board to be cognizant, take a look at it. If you have any suggestions, we usually make some, at least minor changes every year with that.
So what I'm hearing, Mark, is what you're proposing is just to ask the board to look at the pro forma, any suggestions that they may have about wanting to add things to the pro forma calendar, to simply advance to you, or to, or for us to have a discussion as to whether or not
What I heard Mark
the modification.
Mirably suggest, if I understood correctly, was to provide more forewarning to the board farther in advance than 1 month
Yeah,
of upcoming pro forma items.
Yeah, and I've got that down, preliminary discussion items versus action items. So I wrote that down as like That's the whole timing of it then.
Right, mine would be, and it's not even mine, I mean, we don't have to change anything, I don't know who asked for it, that's